Alexander the Great, son of Philip of Macedon and Olympias, daughter of Neoptolemus of Epirus, was born at Pella, 356 BC. His mind was formed chiefly by Aristotle, who instructed him in every branch of human learning, especially in the art of government. Alexander was 16 years of age when his father marched against Byzantium and left the government in his hands during his absence. 2 years afterward, he displayed singular courage at the Battle of Chaeronea, 338 BC, where he overthrew the sacred band of the Thebans. "My son," said Philip, as he embraced him after the conflict, "seek for thyself another kingdom, for that which I leave is too small for thee." The father and son quarreled, however, when the former divorced Olympias. Alexander took part with his mother and fled to Epirus to escape his father's vengeance. But receiving his pardon soon afterward, he returned and accompanied him in an expedition against the Triballi, when he saved his life on the field. Philip, being appointed generalissimo of the Greeks, was preparing for a war with Persia when he was assassinated, 336 BC, and Alexander, not yet 20 years of age, ascended the throne. After punishing his father's murderers, he marched on Corinth, and in a general assembly of the Greeks, he caused himself to be appointed to the command of the forces against Persia. On his return to Macedon, he found the Illyrians and Triballi up in arms, whereupon he forced his way through Thrace and was everywhere victorious. But now the Thebans had been induced, by a report of his death, to take up arms, and the Athenians, stimulated by the eloquence of Demosthenes, were preparing to join them. To prevent this coalition, Alexander rapidly marched against Thebes, which, refusing to surrender, was conquered and razed to the ground. 6,000 of the inhabitants were slain, and 30,000 sold into slavery, the house and descendants of the poet Pindar alone being spared. This severity struck terror into all Greece. The Athenians were treated with more leniency. Alexander, having appointed Antipater his deputy in Europe, now prepared to prosecute the war with Persia. He crossed the Hellespont in the spring of 334 BC with 30,000 foot and 5,000 horse, attacked the Persian satraps at the river Granicus, and gained a complete victory, overthrowing the son-in-law of their king, Darius, with his own lance. As a result of the battle, most of the cities of Asia Minor at once opened their gates to the conqueror. Alexander restored democracy in all the Greek cities, and as he passed through Gordium, cut the Gordian knot, which none should loose but the ruler of Asia. During a dangerous illness at Tarsus, brought on by bathing in the Cydnus, he received a letter insinuating that Philip, his physician, had been bribed by Darius to poison him. Alexander handed the letter to Philip, and at the same time swallowed the draught which the latter had prepared. As soon as he recovered, he advanced toward the defiles of Cilicia, in which Darius had stationed himself with an army of 600,000 men. He arrived in November 333 BC in the neighborhood of Ussis, where, on the narrow plain between the mountains and the sea, the unwieldy masses of the Persians were thrown into confusion by the charge of the Macedonians and fled in terror. On the left wing, 30,000 Greek mercenaries held out longer, but they too were at length compelled to yield. All the treasures, as well as the family of Darius, fell into the hands of the conqueror, who treated them with the greatest magnanimity. Overtures for peace, made by Darius on the basis of surrendering to Alexander all Asia west of the Euphrates, were rejected. Alexander now turned toward Syria and Phoenicia. He occupied Damascus, where he found princely treasures and secured to himself all the cities along the shores of the Mediterranean. Tyre, confident in its strong position, resisted him, but was conquered and destroyed after 7 months of incredible exertion. 332 BC. Thence he marched victoriously through Palestine, where all the cities submitted to him, except Gaza. It shared the same fate as Tyre. Egypt, weary of the Persian yoke, welcomed him as a deliverer, and in order to strengthen his dominion here, he restored all the old customs and religious institutions of the country, and founded Alexandria in the beginning of 331 BC. Thence he marched through the Libyan desert in order to consult the oracle of Ammon, whose priest saluted him as a son of Zeus, and he returned with the conviction that he was indeed a god. He then again set out to meet Darius. In October 331 BC, a great battle was fought on the plain stretching eastward to Arbela. Notwithstanding the immense superiority of his adversary, who had collected a new army of more than 1,000,000 men, Alexander was not for a moment doubtful of victory. Heading the cavalry himself, he rushed on the Persians and put them to flight, then hastened to the assistance of his left wing, which in the meanwhile had been sorely pressed. He was anxious to make Darius a prisoner, but Darius escaped on horseback, leaving his baggage and all his treasures a prey to the conqueror. Babylon and Susa, the treasure houses of the east, opened their gates to Alexander, who next marched toward Persepolis, the capital of Persia, which he entered in triumph. The marvelous success of Alexander now began to dazzle his judgment and to inflame his passions. He became a slave to debauchery, and his caprices were as cruel as they were ungrateful. In a fit of drunkenness, and at the instigation of Thias, an Athenian courtesan, he set fire to Persepolis, the wonder of the world, and reduced it to a heap of ashes. Then, ashamed of the deed, he set out with his cavalry in pursuit of Darius. Learning that Bessus, the Bactrian satrap, held him a prisoner, he hastened his march in the hope of saving him. But he found him mortally wounded. 330 BC, he mourned over his fallen enemy and caused him to be buried with all the customary honors, while he hunted down Bessus, who himself aspired to the throne, chasing him over the Oxus to Sogdiana. Having discovered a conspiracy in which the son of Parmenio was implicated, he put both father and son to death, though Parmenio himself was innocent of any knowledge of the affair. This cruel injustice excited universal displeasure. In 329, he penetrated to the farthest known limits of northern Asia and overthrew the Scythians on the banks of the Jaxartes. In the following year, he subdued the whole of Sogdiana and married Roxana, whom he had taken prisoner. She was the daughter of Oxyartes, one of the enemy's captains, and was said to be the fairest of all the virgins of Asia. The murder of his foster brother, Clitus, in a drunken brawl, was followed in 327 BC by the discovery of a fresh conspiracy, in which Callisthenes, a nephew of Aristotle, was falsely implicated. For challenging Alexander's divinity, he was cruelly tortured and hanged. In 327 BC, proceeding to the conquest of India, hitherto known only by name, Alexander crossed the Indus near to the modern Adoc and pursued his way under the guidance of a native prince to the Hydaspes. He there was opposed by Porus, another native prince, whom he overthrew after a bloody contest, and there he lost his charger, Bucephalus. Thence he marched as lord of the country, through the Punjab, establishing Greek colonies. He then wished to advance to the Ganges, but the general murmuring of his troops obliged him, at the Hyphasis, modern Sutlej, to commence his retreat. On regaining the Hydaspes, he built a fleet, and sent one division of his army in it down the river, while the other followed along the banks, fighting its way through successive Indian armies. At length, having reached the ocean, he ordered Nearchus, the commander of the fleet, to sail thence to the Persian Gulf, while he himself struck inland with one division of his army, in order to return home through Gedrosia, Baluchistan. During this march, his forces suffered fearfully from want of food and water. Of all the troops which had set out with Alexander, little more than a fourth part arrived with him in Persia, 325 BC. At Susa he married Statera, the daughter of Darius, and he bestowed presents on those Macedonians, some 10,000 in number, who had married Persian women, his design being to unite the two nations. He also distributed liberal rewards among his soldiers. Soon afterward, he was deprived by death of his favorite Hephaestion. His grief was unbounded, and he interred the dead man with kingly honors. As he was returning from Ecbatana to Babylon, it is said that the Magi foretold that the latter city would prove fatal to him, but he despised their warnings. On the way, he was met by ambassadors from all parts of the world: Libya, Italy, Carthage, Greece, the Scythians, Celts, and Iberians. At Babylon, he was busy with gigantic plans for the future, both of conquest and civilization, when he was suddenly taken ill after a banquet and died 11 days later, 323 BC, in the 32nd year of his age and the 13th of his reign. His body was deposited in a golden coffin at Alexandria by Ptolemaeus, and divine honors were paid to him, not only in Egypt, but in other countries. He had appointed no heir to his immense dominions. But to the question of his friends, who should inherit them, he replied, the most worthy. After many disturbances, his generals recognized as kings the weak-minded Aridaeus, a son of Philip by Philina, the dancer, and Alexander's posthumous son by Roxana, Alexander Agus, while they shared the provinces among themselves, assuming the title of satraps. Perdiccas, to whom Alexander had, on his deathbed, delivered his ring, became guardian of the kings during their minority. The empire of Alexander soon broke up, and his dominions were divided among his generals. Alexander was more than a conqueror. He diffused the language and civilization of Greece wherever victory led him, and planted Greek kingdoms in Asia, which continued to exist for some centuries. At the very time of his death, he was engaged in devising plans for the drainage of the unhealthy marshes around Babylon and a better irrigation of the extensive plains. It is even supposed that the fever which he caught there, rather than his famous drinking bout, was the real cause of his death. To Alexander, the ancient world owed a vast increase of its knowledge in geography, natural history, etc. He taught Europeans the road to India and gave them the first glimpses of that magnificence and splendor which has dazzled and captivated their imagination for more than 2,000 years. The wonderful element in the campaigns of Alexander and his tragical death at the height of his power threw a rare romantic interest around his figure. It is ever the fate of a great name to be enshrined in fable, and Alexander soon became the hero of romantic story, scarcely more wonderful than the actual, but growing from age to age with the mythopoeic spirit, which can work as freely in fact as fiction. The earliest form of the story, which we know, is the great romance connected with the name of Callisthenes, which, under the influence of the living popular tradition, arose in Egypt about 200 AD and was carried through Latin translations to the west, through Armenian and Syriac versions to the east. It became widely popular during the Middle Ages and was worked into poetic form by many writers in French and German. Albericle of Besançon wrote in Middle High German an epic on the subject in the first half of the 12th century, which was the basis of the German Pfaffe Lamprecht's Alexanderbuch, also of the 12th century. The French poets Lambert Licourt and Alexandre de Bernay composed between 1180 and 1190 a romance of Alexander, the 12-syllable meter of which gave rise to the name Alexandrines. The German poem of Rudolf of Ems was based on the Latin epic of Walter of Chatillon about 1200, which became henceforward the prevailing form of the story. In contrast with it is the 13th century Old English epic of Alexander, in Volume 1 of Weber's Metrical Romances, 1810, based on the Callisthenes version. The story appears also in the East, worked up in conjunction with myths of other nationalities, especially the Persian. It appears in Ferdowsi and among later writers in Nizami. From the Persians, both the substance of the story and its form in poetical treatment have extended to Turks and other Mohammedans, who have interpreted Alexander as the Dusul-Karnain, two-horned, of the Quran, and to the Hindus, which last had preserved no independent traditions of Alexander.